What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS.
Established over 100 years ago, Watkins Books is one of the world's oldest and leading independent bookshops specializing in esoterica. We have the widest selection of esoteric books in the UK, and our friendly and knowledgeable staff are here to assist you in a unique ambience of our shop. So come and visit us in the heart of London as we're open every day.
The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online. You're now watching the UK's only alternative late night talk show, and I'm your host, Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Isabella Price. Now, Isabella has written One Truth, Many Paths, which is a leading-edge book series on unitive spirituality that rewrites the traditional stories about religions, challenging everything you thought you knew about religion. Now, her book series shows how personal inspiration and truth can be found in each of the world's wisdom traditions. The underlying version of One Truth, Many Paths is unity within diversity, as based on the understandings that what unites us in our basic humanness is infinitely greater than what divides us. Isabella Price, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm honored to be on your show, and I look forward to our chat.
No, I'm very grateful for you being here. Now, whereabouts in the world are you from? I'm just trying to place your accent.
Originally, I grew up in Switzerland, the German-speaking part, but I've been living now for 15 years here in California, in the Bay Area, near San Francisco and Berkeley.
How beautiful. Right, okay. Now I'm totally jealous, okay. Yeah, that's a great place. Okay, so you found yourself in that part of the world, right. So, what were you struggling with in life, would you say? What was causing you pain to have the awakening experience that you did? And also, what was your awakening experience?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, you know, I had many of these experiences. It was more like a gradual process for me, but the move to California really opened up a whole new world for me. It opened up many doors, and it led to a fundamental shift in awareness, because, I had to basically leave everything back in Switzerland, the job I had, a well-paid job in higher education. And of course, I met my husband, and that's what brought me over. But I still had to start, like a blank slate. And somehow, and I was teaching classes eventually, at an art college. And then, I heard about meditation, and, I started to first, practice, Zen meditation. And that started to open me up to a whole other dimension of being and living. And then I traveled to India, and that was a truly life transforming experience. India feels like being on another planet, and I had so many encounters. And I came back, and then, I heard about Almachi, the hugging saint, who comes right here next to where we live. And I went to see her. And what really also planted the seeds for, this vision that underlies my book series, One Truth, Many Paths, the many paths, the different wisdom traditions leading to the one truth, is just the state of our world. 6 months before I moved to California, 9/11 struck, and I was, of course, horrified by these events like everybody else, and deeply saddened at the division that erupted among, the different Abrahamic traditions, and all these animosities and war and conflict in the aftermath of 9/11. And I believe this really planted the seeds. But again, the soil was already fertile, because, I had already engaged in deep spiritual practice, daily meditation, and so it was just literally, one thing leading to the other. And of course, there is much more that could be said. It was a long journey. It's been now 15 years, and it continues on until to my last breath. And the journey never ends, as we say.
Oh, that's so true. That is so true. I think it's a lifetime's worth of journey to find truth, and that truth always shifts a little bit as we discover anew. So you found on your journey more joy, more peace, more trust. You
Yes.
found a life's purpose. How did you find these things from the books that you've written, in a sense, or is there more to it than that?
Yes, well, the books were incredible teaching to me. I would say that the creative process, of writing these books, which is partly research, but I really poured my soul essence into that. The books really led me on a path of surrendering and trusting, because I could not have completed this creative process without deepening my trust, because it wasn't an easy journey. I mean, there were a lot of odds. First off, when, the books were getting ready, I mean, the whole publishing industry went into panic mode after the economy tanked in 2008. And, I also wrote the books in a language that's not my mother tongue. I mean, I grew up speaking German, in Switzerland. And also, the creative process as such took me to my limits. Sometimes, even over my limits, that I just felt this is a huge project, much larger than I anticipated. I just cannot do this anymore, and I wanted to give up. And yet, what actually made me sit down time and again, day after day, was the fire in my soul, the creative passion that I had, because I felt that my whole being was so aligned with that vision of bringing more unity to the world and that, applies to religion, because I do believe firmly what unites us in our basic humanness is infinitely greater than what divides us. And that really is what was driving me. And ultimately, it was just surrendering to the unknown. I mean, you don't know the outcome of the creative process, you just have to let go and surrender and trust that it will work out. And so it really deepened my spiritual journey greatly, and I'm immensely grateful for that experience.
Yes, that's so interesting what you're saying there, especially the timings, like when you brought the book out, the collapse of the economy, prior to coming to America 6 months, you got the 9/11, this would have made you care so much more about humanity, and especially with what's going on in the world right now, what's going on in America, what's going on,
Yes.
in Europe, everywhere really, isn't it? It's not just one place, is it? There's lots of issues right now. But if there wasn't, then how would we be able to go back into ourselves and, like as you found purpose through what happens in the world, the pain, you find the purpose. Other people are finding their calling from the pain that's coming on in this world right now. It's almost like it's an enigma, but it's needed to awaken people.
Yes, I think that's a good point, an interesting point, Kevin. I mean, the world is in some ways like a training ground, and it's the world of paradoxes. Joy and suffering go hand in hand, and sometimes the suffering is what opens our hearts. It breaks our hearts wide open so that we can hopefully learn from that experience, integrate it, and evolve psychologically and spiritually. And also all the chaos that's going on right now on our planet, I believe, is something that's part of the transition that we all find ourselves in right now. All the wisdom traditions are telling us we're in these major transitions, great shifts are on the way, and it's like the birth pangs of something new that's ready to emerge. And birth pangs have always been painful when we look back in history, but they're also the catalysts, that propel us into that new. So I like to look at all this suffering, the pain, and the chaos that we currently witness in our world from a broader cosmic perspective. And also it allows us to kind of step back a little bit, and even though we deeply feel with those people who lose their lives, as it just happened recently, in that horrible massacre in France, in Nice, and also in the United States with the shootings that have become an almost daily occurrence. But again, there is always a deeper purpose in all of that, and I believe it's to open our hearts, to become more compassionate, to have more empathy for the suffering of life. And that's what Jesus Christ was ultimately all about as well, among many other great teachers.
Absolutely, and we're just about to touch on that. This is a good lead up. This is absolutely, but some people in the spiritual community, they tend to say, "Well, I'm not going to look at anything negative. I'm not, I'm going to keep positive, and that's the way I'm going to lead my life," which is fine. That's your right. How can you ignore the suffering, though? I just don't get it. How can you ignore what's going on in your own back garden? Because it's through, for me, it's through not ignoring it that's made me realize what I really want to do. Right? And it's made me call upon my purpose. So I'm grateful for it in one hand, but I couldn't have ignored it.
Yes. Thank you for making this point, Kevin. I think it's a very valid one. And it's true that sometimes in spiritual circles, we find what you could call bypassing, spiritual bypassing. They don't want to deal with the problems in the world, with the suffering. And, we've all been there at some point, but here I agree with you that it's the times where we can just withdraw on our meditation cushion or in a cave in the Himalayas, completely detached from this marketplace, from the world of suffering. These times, I believe, are gone. What we need right now is to bring spirituality into the world, into the marketplace. And that means participating in it full-heartedly. And that means also feeling the suffering and holding it, being able to be an energetic container that's wide enough and large enough to also hold all the suffering, because it is a part of this life and it is part of the paradoxes of this three-dimensional plane, of space and time that we've all incarnated into. And so avoiding that or bypassing that suffering, the pain, our own shadow, psychological shadow falls also into that category. That, I believe, is not a solution right now in that critical time of transition.
No, I absolutely agree there. Now, your work is very, very, very interesting, actually, because what you've done is an updated version of the Christ consciousness in the sense of the Christ material, and not many people have done that from a spiritual perspective as well. We're so close to starting on the subjects, but really, why that? Why not? Would you say this has been your calling to do this?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You named it. It's a deep inner calling, and that is always a calling that is a bit mysterious. I can't give you a fully rational explanation. I can't really put it in words, but it's something that came from the deepest part of my soul essence, who I am. And somehow, as I embarked on this journey, this calling became more and more urgent. And I was going with it. I was heeding this call, and I just, did my part. I could not do this.
Okay. Well, you've done hats off to you. These books are out there now, and the material's there, and I'm sure there'll be new material in the future, but it's all about these books right now. Well, okay, we could look at culture and consciousness, or we could look at the updated version of Christ and consciousness. This is really your call on this one.
Yes, so let me just kind of lay a bit the foundation for this updated version of Jesus Christ that I like to call, the mystic Christ or the cosmic Christ. And I believe this is also going to be the Christ of the future, the Christ of the 21st century. But before we dive deeper into that understanding of Christ, let me just give you a very, very brief overview of the different versions of Christ that still coexist today, among people who all call themselves Christians, and there's a certain irony to that, and yet they have a very different understanding of what Jesus Christ really embodied and what his values were. And so if we look again at evolution, kind of taking a broader perspective, we see that there are these different stages in the evolution of human history, human culture, and consciousness. And, if we start first with what I like to call the tribal consciousness, tribal organization, which is one of the earliest forms of community, a tribal version of Jesus Christ would look like, Jesus as a master shaman who can perform these mighty deeds, like walking on the water, turning water into wine, or raising the dead from the graves. That would be a version of Jesus Christ that resonates with the value system, the belief system of tribal consciousness. And then when we move into the next stage, in the spiral of the evolution of human culture and consciousness, then we have the warrior consciousness. And, some people do have that gravity center even today. So they see Christ as the warrior Christ. And now this is a value system that's based on domination and control. We find it with great conquerors in history like, Genghis Khan or Alexander the Great. And if you have that gravity center, you're going to see and emphasize the warrior Christ. And examples are the controversial book of Revelation, where Jesus, returns as in the second coming and battles the forces of the Antichrist in the final showdown at Armageddon. And it's a very bloody and violent affair. This is a violent Christ, and this is a Christ that justifies act of violence in the name of God. And of course, we see that phenomena in all forms of terrorism, holy wars like the Crusades are an example of this warrior Christ, and the Crusaders saw themselves as the foot soldiers of Christ, so they felt compelled to do that, the end justified the means, basically. And then we move into more traditional, conventional understanding of Jesus Christ, and traditional consciousness brought authority and order to the warrior value system, because that was the time when all the great religious systems emerged, and they introduced law codes such as moral living, how can we avoid violence, how can we coexist more or less peacefully as a community. And so law, order, authority is important in traditional consciousness, but it's also very ethnocentric. That means it's only my ethnicity that's important to me. That might be my race, my nation, my religion, or what I believe, my congregation, my tribe, basically, and it doesn't go beyond that. So it tends to be very dualistic in its approach. So it's us versus them. And we are, of course, the true believer, we are the ones who get the absolute truth, and everybody else has it wrong. And if you don't believe in our understanding of Jesus Christ, well, good luck. You might go to hell, straight. So that's the kind of understanding. And so here, the traditional Jesus is, of course, the Jesus of dogma, of the creeds, the traditional Christ of the church. But it's also the Christ who says, you can only attain salvation through me alone. So this is a Christ that's unique. He's the only Son of God, the one and only Son of God. And basically, he excludes the rest of humankind. We cannot be divine. Only Jesus is fully human and fully divine. So again, this is the traditional Christ of the creeds, the dogmatic Christ of the church tradition. And so then, we move into the next stage, which is, the age of reason, the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution. And the principles here are based, on rationality. Progress is seen in science and technology. So this version of Jesus Christ would again be very, very different. Now, this would be a rational Christ, a Christ that's an embodiment of a full human potential, and he has, extraordinary skills. But it's important to also say that this would be a Christ that's stripped of any supernatural powers, is stripped of divinity. It's certainly not a mystical Christ. So again, it's a very rationalistic version of Jesus Christ in this modernist consciousness. And then we move to postmodern consciousness, which basically emerged with the 1960s. This is a value system, like the flower power movement that, here in California, where I'm living, and the anti-war demonstrations, and civil rights movement, women's rights movement, feminism, and also environmentalism. And so this postmodernist value system emphasizes egalitarian principles. So this is a very world-centric value system that does not only include my ethnicity, my tribe, my church congregation, but all of us, all of humanity. So it's world-centric. And so the Jesus Christ here is a Jesus Christ that truly embodies universal compassion. And he's all inclusive, and he's a Christ who is also very sensitive to social movements, social justice. It's a Christ who truly cares for the poor, the oppressed, and the disenfranchised. And of course, we can back that up with scripture. So that would be a postmodernist version of Christ. And then when we move beyond postmodernism, then we get into the cosmic Christ, the mystical Christ, which is, higher states in the evolution of human culture and consciousness. And these higher states then are cosmocentric. So they move from a world-centric orientation to include everything, the whole cosmos, the whole of creation. And these stages of consciousness affirm the interconnectedness of all life, not just humans, but all life. That includes other than human life, animals, vegetation, and the whole creation, including the cosmos. So these are just, just giving you a little bit of a nutshell update on the different versions that coexist. And so the one that I believe is going to be the version of Christ that's the future, the 21st century one, is definitely the cosmocentric understanding of Christ, the mystical Christ, as we could also call him.
Absolutely. And, when I've read parts of the Bible before, I've actually never read the whole Bible. I know there's different versions of the Bible, but I've never actually read the whole Bible. And when I have attempted to, it's just in a language and in a way it's done. I just can't get into it. It makes it makes very little sense to me in some respects because it's of the age. But what you're addressing here is a kind of the resurrection of Jesus' original wisdom teachings in a sense. Now that I would read. How different have you found his original wisdom teachings, and how did you extract that? Where's that information come from compared to what's in the Bible as we speak now?
Yes. Well, when you say the Bible, I guess you refer to the 4 official or canonical gospels that, have been accepted by the church tradition. But as you know, there are also other gospels that have never been included, such as, the Gnostic gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of Mary, referring to Mary Magdalene. And so these gospels have just been discovered fairly recently, right after World War II, in the sands of the Egyptian desert. It was one of these truly revolutionary findings. And this, when you look at the Jesus Christ, how he's portrayed in those gospels, especially also the Gospel of Thomas, the most prominent of the Gnostics, you see a very different Jesus that comes across as a wisdom guide rather than our savior. Now we do have, some of these passages also in the Gnostic Gospels that show Jesus Christ as a teacher of wisdom. If it's okay with you, I'd like to quote some passages to back that up a little bit. So, for example, you have, in a letter of Paul, we find that Paul pays tribute to the wisdom Christ, the cosmic Christ. And he says the cosmic Christ is the one who holds everything together in the heavens and on earth. Now that refers to the sacred impulse of evolution embodied by Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ holds everything together between heaven and earth. That's the whole creation. That is a cosmocentric version. And this is also what priest and scientist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin called the third nature of Christ. The first nature being just the historical Christ, the second, the Christ of faith, the dogmatic Christ of the church tradition. And so this is the third nature that expands the vision of Christ to include all of creation, all of the cosmos as being inherently sacred. And this vision can also be backed up by quotes from John, the official Gospel of John, where Jesus Christ says, "I'm the light of the world." And so Christ is the light of all beings, not just human beings, but all other than human beings. This light infuses all of creation, all of the manifest world. And there's this beautiful saying in the Gospel of Thomas, which I mentioned before, that I would like to quote, where Jesus Christ basically says, "I'm the light in all, and all come forth from me, and all attain to me. Split a piece of wood, and I'm there. Pick up a stone, and you will find me there." So basically, Jesus Christ here is in all animate and also inanimate object. His light, his consciousness is even under a stone. So that includes all of nature. And we get away from this anthropocentric understanding of Christ, that only we humans are made in the image of God, at the exclusion of all other life forms, because here everything is included. And we know from modern science, modern quantum physics, that indeed every atom in the universe does have photons, life waves within itself. So that actually confirms this ancient wisdom that we find in scriptures, that indeed everything is light. And so, of course, when Jesus Christ says, "I'm the light in all, and all come forth," he refers to all of us. We also have that spark of light within us. And there's many passages in scriptures that confirm that we are this light as well. You are as I am. I mean, he says that, in the Gospel of Thomas. There's many teachings. I could quote more passages, but, that's just like a little warm up.
Well, yeah. I mean, when the church's official version is always to go through, to get to God, you've got to go through Christ. That never resonated with me.
Yes.
Never resonated with me. Yeah, that was sinful, and that was against the rule book to even think differently to that. There's a lot of fear, isn't there, in the actual church version?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. And of course, this version reflects traditional consciousness. That's a version of Jesus that claims, you can attain salvation exclusively through me. And you have to see when Christianity, established itself as a religion, it was, of course, a very different time. The world was more provincial. It was not yet as globalized as today. And so at that time, all religions have these exclusivist claims, and part of it was also because, other influences were perceived to be a threat to one's own religion. So such claims have to be read within the context of the time, the cultural historical context. And so again, it's very problematic, though, if we apply this understanding today to, the teachings of Jesus Christ, because, we live in this globalized world where everything is interconnected, and the wisdom of all the other religions has become so readily available to us for the first time in human history. And so it's a bit absurd to still state, well, Jesus Christ is, the one and only path to salvation. Because when you look at the Christian mystics, like the well-known Master Eckhart, he said we are all sons and daughters of God. but we just don't realize it yet, because we may not yet have awakened to our Christ consciousness within us. But I just want to mention that we do find also in the Christian tradition, especially when we look at the contemplative tradition and the mystics, we find examples, of pioneers who were way ahead of their time. I mean, Master Eckhart lived, in the Middle Ages, and he said, we are all sons and daughters of Christ. So we're all potential Christs. But again, we don't necessarily recognize it yet, but we all have the potential. And that's an important thing to keep in mind when we're confronted with such exclusivist claims like, you can only attain salvation through Jesus Christ, as, the church tradition has claimed it for centuries.
Or that, God is love, God is peace, God is joy, but if you're gay, I'm sorry, guys, you're going to go to hell, but God is love.
Right, it is. It includes all of us, no matter what your sexual orientation, your gender, your race, your religious affiliation. It's a God of abundance, a God of love and abundance. And that is the God that Jesus Christ talked about. That is the God to whom he had that profound relationship. And that's the God of the 21st century.
Yes. What about self-love? Does his teachings talk about self-love?
Well, you cannot love others unless you start with yourself. And it starts with self-love. It is included in the teachings. I mean, you cannot be, how can you empathize, with the suffering of the world if you have not first accepted yourself? And that means accepting yourself in all your imperfections, including, the psychological shadow issues that we have to come to terms with if we're truly serious about inner transformation and about walking the spiritual path. We do have to do this inner work of transformation. And that is what Jesus talked about in many teachings. It just has been buried, by, the traditional teachings of the church, which of course wanted to keep its mediator position between God and sinful humanity. And so it was all about, establishing, of course, these power structures. But again, we do have that direct connection to the divine. And, Jesus Christ, in many of his parables, even in the canonical official gospels, talks, about this true self within us that we could call the Christ consciousness within us within a Christian context. And if you'd like, I can give you some examples, of his stories and parables that actually talk about this spark within. Basically, one metaphor that Jesus used is the seeds. And he says, some of the seeds fall to the wayside and they perish, and other seeds take roots in fertile soil and they grow like a plant until the time of harvest, which here means God realization or realizing the Christ consciousness within us. So this is, one of the parables he uses, the seed, the mustard seed. But another one is the light, the spark of light, and especially emphasized in the Gospel of Thomas and, the other Gnostic Gospels. And so, but we also find it, in passages in John and Matthew. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm the light of the world. And he says to his disciples, and you are the children of the light, of the living Father. And it's very interesting that Jesus even goes so far in the Gospel of Thomas to tell his disciples, I am your twin. So he's not that hierarchical, authoritarian teacher, utterly removed from humanity, high up in the heavens, but he's the first among equals. And he says, even in the Gospel of Thomas, I can quote, he says, I'm not your teacher whoever drinks from my mouth will become as I am, and I myself shall become that person, and the hidden things, meaning the wisdom, will be revealed to that person. So it means like he just is a role model, you know, he shows the path ahead, but if we follow through on those wisdom teachings and do the deep inner work of transformation that engages us in our totality, then we will also drink from his mouth, from his wisdom, and we will be able to awaken to the Christ consciousness within us. So there's many passages, you know, actually in both the canonical and the non-canonical Gospels that do back up these wisdom teachings, and that, you know, we have this spark of the divine light is within us. It's trapped in our human bodies, but it's within us. And that's a teaching that's, of course, at odds with traditional church teachings, which have been disempowering, whereas this is actually a very empowering teaching, psychologically and spiritually, and gives us more joy in life too.
Do you think, from your studies, that there's another way of looking at the Christ, in the sense that, you know, he wasn't so perfect, and that he had flaws as well? You know, he maybe wasn't always happy. Maybe he wasn't always nicest to be around. Maybe he was, you know, this wasn't the easiest man.
Yeah, well, very good point, because his path was difficult. His mission was very, you know, excruciatingly difficult. And of course, he was also human, you know, while he walked this earth. So we need to also emphasize his humanity. And this is, you know, when you look at the Christ of the church has always, you know, depicted Christ as being so removed from humanity, you know, from all basic human feelings. He's, you know, like almost utterly divine and so transcendent. But when he walked the earth, you know, he was in a human body, and that meant that he suffered too. He went through his evolution as well. And there's that scene on the cross, as you know, in Mark, the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus Christ cries out in pain and agony, and he says, God, you know, Father, have you forsaken me? I mean, you know, in the Gospel of Mark, he comes across as very human, you know, it's a flesh and blood version of Jesus Christ, and not that supernatural, utterly removed version, you know, that we find in a more traditional context. So yes, of course, you know, he had to go through that suffering too, and that makes it actually more attractive for us, because we can relate to him more easily. He's like, you know, a role model, but he nevertheless was also fully human. So in our own humanness, you know, we can have a deeper connection to him when we see, you know, this suffering side in him as well. I think this is a very, very important point.
Yes, absolutely. And was there any teachings you came across that in this new sort of updated version of the Christ information, that there was to do with manifestation, living in present moment, just, you know, some of these newer qualities that have come through in the new sort of paradigm of spirituality?
Right. Yes, again, when we look at the cosmic or mystic Christ, the first thing is, you know, this is a Christ who is fully participating in life, in the here and now. And I want to also mention that when I did my research, I came across a painting that depicts Jesus Christ not on a cross, as we usually see it, but it depicts him on the tree of life. In fact, I actually have the painting here. I'm not sure if you could see it, but I just want to hold it up close to the camera. Can you see this picture?
Yes, I can see that. Yep.
So it shows here, and this is, by the way, from an unknown Alsatian master in the late 15th century. But what's interesting about this picture is that here Jesus Christ stands for life, and not so much for death and the passion and the afterlife. That's so emphasized in a traditional context. Here it's a life-affirming message. It's the tree of life. is a universal symbol that we find in many wisdom traditions. But as you know, there's the two trees in the Garden of Eden in Genesis. And one is the tree of immortality, the tree of immortal life, which is, the message of Jesus Christ to humankind. And the other is, the tree of the polar opposites of all duality, good and evil, day and night, male and female. And this is the tree of the forbidden fruit. And so again, the tree symbolism is very important here in the Christian tradition. And to show Jesus Christ on the tree of life is a life-affirming message. It shows Jesus Christ as the creative impulse of life, of all unfoldings. And it also affirms the sacredness of nature, of humans and all other than human life forms, nature in all its beauty. And it's a green version of Christ, if you will, that also opens the door for an ecological awareness, especially at the time where we keep destroying our ecological balance at an unprecedented pace. And so I think this is very, very important to emphasize, this ecological nature of Jesus Christ, on the tree of life. And there's also statements in the Gospel of John where Jesus says, I'm the vine, I'm the bread of life. So there's many of references that back this up. And of course, when you're life affirming, then you're focusing on this very moment and not on death and the afterlife, which again is more a traditional understanding of Jesus Christ. So I really like this version of the ecological Christ, and most people don't know about this depiction, Jesus on the tree of life, because it's usually never mentioned. It's always the man on the dead wood of the cross, so to speak, although the cross has some interesting symbols. But just to conclude, I also want to mention that the tree of life is the world axis, symbolically speaking, through which the new energies keep pouring into this world of form and manifestations. And these new energies help us to awaken to the Christ consciousness within us. This is the same tree under which the Buddha attained enlightenment. Remember, it was under the Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening. Symbolically speaking, it's the same tree on which Jesus Christ hangs here in that depiction. We find this universal world tree in many mythic narratives across cultures. So I just wanted to mention this example as a powerful metaphor.
Absolutely. And what about then his relationship to women and and Mary Magdalene as well? I mean, what did you discover there?
Yes, and that's, of course, something that's been very dear to my heart. And we know based on research, especially also when we look at the non-canonical Gnostic gospel, that Jesus Christ had a very close and loving relationship to women. As you know, women were treated as outcasts, in a very patriarchal society at, the time of his life. And they were not allowed to read scripture. So they were not allowed to gather in public. They were not allowed to teach. So there is a lot of evidence, and scholars agree on that Jesus Christ did not only have 12 male apostles, but that he also had female apostles, and that Mary Magdalene was the most important of those female disciples, but they had to meet secretly, because of all the social conventions. And so I will go into Mary Magdalene in just a while, but I believe that Jesus Christ had a very healthy integration of both archetypal masculine and archetypal feminine energies within himself. That's why he was so compassionate, and that's why, his heart was so large that it was all inclusive. And so he would talk to women who were treated as outcasts, like, prostitutes, for example, or, the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, who was also treated as an outcast, or women who had several husbands, who also were considered to be, outcasts. And so he would talk to each one of them. And when it comes to Mary Magdalene, who was, of course, closest to him, there's a lot that has been said and written about her. But you may have heard the great news from Rome. Pope Francis announced just a few days ago that she will be elevated greatly in her status to the apostles of the apostles. Officially, proclaimed by a pope. That's revolutionary. And her feast day, which is coming up in 2 days, July the 22nd, will also be elevated in status. So finally, justice is done after 1,400 years, where she was, perceived as the repentant whore, the repentant prostitute, which we know today was a fabrication, of Pope Leo in the 6th century. And even though the church officially in 69 said, okay, this is not true, it's a fabrication, people still believe that. You'd be surprised how many people still believe that she's that repentant sinner, that, the church pieced together from different parts of the Gospels. And so, just about Mary Magdalene, what we know today and what even the official canonical gospel state is that Mary was the very first witness to the resurrection. And she was the one who brought the good news of the resurrection to the other disciples. So this is what justifies the claim to call her apostles to the apostles. And she was also present at the Passion of Christ, at the cross. All other disciples were fleeing in panic because, they were fearful of being arrested. So it's really about time that Mary Magdalene gets elevated. And she's also said to have been the one who has been initiated into the deepest and most advanced wisdom teachings of Jesus Christ. This is a portrait of Mary Magdalene that we find in the Gnostic Gospel. So that strongly emphasized that she had a very prominent role in early Christianity among his disciples, and clearly was very close to him. It was a deep spiritual connection, a soul union between the two, and the highest form of conscious love,
Right.
That united them, as I believe.
Right. Do you think he had relationships with women?
Well, do you mean by relationships sexual relationships? It could mean many things, there's a whole range of relationship. Well, see, that's of course something that's become very popularized with the Da Vinci Code, Dan Brown's novel, and the movie that, basically makes the point that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married. And let's say from a scholarly perspective, that's highly questionable, although, of course, it is tempting to think that they had relations that may have included sacred sexual relations. So I would say, based on my research and, my own intuition, that I would like to keep that question open. Now, clearly, we can say that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were very, very close to each other. And I believe they were engaged in a relationship that we would call mystical conscious love at the deepest soul level. They supported each other mutually. She was initiated, as I said, in his most advanced teachings. And they actually mutually, you could say they bore progeny, but it doesn't necessarily have to be understood in a biological sense. The progeny could be the teaching, the advanced spiritual teachings that came out of that union. And they may have chosen to give a sexual expression to that union. I mean, that's not excluded. There's actually different contemplative paths. In Christianity, the path of conscious love, as it's called, the fifth way, that completely or offers the whole range of relationship, of how you engage. When there is such a deep conscious soul union. So Jesus and Mary may or may not have chosen to give sexual expression to their union. I mean, I would necessarily state that this happened because we cannot really know, but I wouldn't necessarily exclude it either. So this is my take on it.
Okay,
basically.
no, very, very interesting. Thank you for sharing that as well. And also, just one sort of, well, near enough a final question. Do you think Christ wanted a religion after his name?
Well, here's the interesting thing. I mean, of course, Christianity didn't exist, and I think he was a mystic, basically, a Jewish mystic who just, was fully aligned with his dharmic purpose, his mission in this life, as were others, like the Buddha and the yogi saints of India. And so he just was deeply, deeply in union, with Source, with the divine, and walked this path, even though he probably knew that it would be a very difficult path, because, the spiritual path is never easy. Now, in his case, he sacrificed his life, which, of course, was excruciatingly hard, if you really imagine what he went through. But the spiritual path is never an easy path. It actually is, as scriptures tell us, an arduous journey. And as we go deeper, we will find inner turmoil. We will come to terms with, our shadow issues that we have to process psychologically so that we can evolve psychospiritually. And that is not easy. That's why so many people are shying away. Yet the rewards are immense. It gives you more peace. It allows you to be more grounded and to experience more joy in life, ultimately, because you're able to navigate life more gracefully. Even when challenges happen, you're a bit more detached. And so, again, this is what I believe. Jesus Christ was clear on his mission. He went for it, even though he knew it would be a hard life, because he was so way ahead of his time. He was one of the great pioneers, and his contemporaries couldn't fully understand his teachings because, you have to be on a similar level of consciousness. So, of course, it was later on distorted, when, the imperial church was established, and it co-opted some of the values of the Roman Empire, but was anything but loving, even though Jesus' teachings were all about loving kindness, ultimately. And so that's where the whole distortion started to set in. So it's like you have two religions. The original one, which wasn't yet Christianity. I mean, I would call it the religion of wisdom and compassion, which, by the way, is also the title of my book. I emphasize precisely the original teachings, Jesus Christ, the love and wisdom of a first century mystic, because this is what I believe what he truly taught and embodied. And a lot of that was changed later on and got distorted, for reasons of power and control. Yes, I do have a website, and that's www, and then ONE MANYPATHS, One Truth manypath.com. And the many paths are, of course, the different wisdom traditions to the one truth.
Okay. This is the final question now. What would you say then is a really important message for the audience in regards to your work?
Yes. Well, in regards to my word and the takeaway, to our listeners here, I hope is that they will see that, I feel in order to really allow these new values, and these new energies to come in, we need to move from, an ethnocentric version of Jesus Christ that includes some of us but excludes the rest, into an all-inclusive version, all of us. And not just all of us humans being made in the image of God, but it includes also nature and all other life forms. Animals, vegetation are all precious, made in the image of God, moving away from this idea that we humans are the masters, as we read in scriptures, and dominate and subdue, all of creation. This is just not a vision that is helpful anymore at this critical juncture in time and history. We are not the masters. We share this beautiful planet with other precious life forms. And we have to really expand it into this cosmic vision. And in order to do that, and I emphasize that again and again, we do have to do this inner work of transformation, and it needs to be seriously done. It needs to be a full commitment to our own awakening, because nobody else can do that for us. We have to do that for ourselves. We have to start with a spiritual practice, whatever you may do, prayer, meditation, but do something to tap into this Christ consciousness within yourself, and then you will be transformed and you will become as I am, as Jesus Christ taught his disciples, in the Gospel of Thomas. So it's really moving into what I believe a truly 21st century version of Christ that empowers us psychologically and spiritually, rather than disempowering us, as it has been the case, throughout history. And so to be a fully integrated modern human being, I believe that this really needs to happen. And again, we have to do the work ourselves. Nobody else is going to do it. And when we do it, it will radiate out into the world and affect everything for positive change. That's how we catalyze positive change. At least this is what I firmly believe.
Well, we have reached the top of the hour right now, and it's been very, very interesting. We've been linking your books up throughout the interview, because there's more than one book, along with your website as well. And I'd just like to say, Isabel Price, just thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me to your show, Kevin, and it was truly delightful to chat with you.
Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on the More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on our past and upcoming guests on the show via themoreshow.com, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.